Welcome to the Jyotish project. My name is Sachin Sharma, and we are continuing with the series How to Study Jyotish. This is lecture 4, Why Studying Jyotish is So Confusing and How to See Through the Noise. So let's get right into it. So, the objective of this lecture is to uncover why so many sincere students feel lost in their study of Jyotish, not just because of the complexity, but because how they're also receiving a system that is fractured, decontextualized, and distorted over the centuries. So that's the what we've received over the last what has survived the tides of time over the last few thousands of years. And we will explore the ancient disintegration of a unified darshana into isolated disciplines, but also we will explore the modern flattening of sacred knowledge into consumable content and the absence of a guiding frame to orient the student. So, the modern issues with the process of learning. So, this lecture offers a path out of the confusion as well, not through more technique, but through recovering the thread of meaning, purpose, and perception that holds Jyotish together as a living vision, right? So, that's the objective to understand these kinds of ideas in this particular lecture so that we can have a better relationship with Jyotish, we can study Jyotish better, and make Jyotish work really well. So let's get into it. These are the 8 sections that we're going to cover: the ancient fragmentation, the modern fragmentation, technique without telos, how the ongoing culture undermines study, especially deep studies, deep, slow, deliberate, sincere study, and the need for a guiding frame, seeing through the noise and returning to meaning. And finally, the importance of method, teacher, and rhythm. That's the most important. The last section of this lecture would be the most important one. It'll be very brief. So, the ancient fragmentation. So, to understand why Jyotish is so often misinterpreted today, we must begin not with YouTube, but with history. So there once existed a unified vision, not a patchwork of disciplines that we have now, but a seamless darshana. Right? There were those who inquired not as authorities dispensing final answers, but as seekers refining perception through method, dialogue, and practice. What later became Jyotish, Ayurveda, Yoga, Sankhya, Vastu, and all of these different uh, disciplines, uh, they weren't these rigid bifurcations, these disciplines that are uh, different from each other, divorced from each other, but they were evolving lenses, each emphasizing a certain facet of the real and deepening it through centuries of subtle observation. So, centuries and thousands of years of subtle observation, dialogue, cultivation, study, different disciplines were cultivated. They weren't different in the sense that they are divorced from each other. They come from the same root, same sort of idea, but they are emphasizing on different aspects of things. But they're truly deeply connected. The Jyotish inquired into time, karma, causality, is pattern recognition through direct observation. It's a pratyak shastra. So, relationship of consciousness with space time, studying karma, and the psychometaphysics, as I call it, the entanglement with the psychodrama of existence. Then there's Ayurveda, which we know is more the medicinal side, where there's a distortion, a vikruti, and that imbalance, that disharmony is then balanced by understanding season, nature, all of this. And Jyotish and Ayurveda are to be studied in tandem. I believe they should not be studied in isolation at all. But because Jyotish is so distorted that it's very hard to study anything else, including Ayurveda, Yoga, Sankhya, or Vastu with Jyotish. Because Jyotish itself, the philosophy of Jyotish is so distorted, so broken, that it's just seen as um, different discipline about predictions and worship and all of these kinds of things, supernatural stuff, or palmistry, and these kinds of things are associated with Jyotish, which is really wrong. This is the fragmentation that we have right now within Jyotish itself. So then we have yoga, which inquired into understanding the inner instrumentation, Yoga is sort of the foundational layer of all the other disciplines. Yoga is the epistemology. How we know what we know is through yoga. Yoga not just refines perception, but it also makes our concentration sharp, our capacity to focus more, memorize, retain more, make better correlations, and develop a subtler mind, which is more acutely aware of all the chain of causality, the chain of being and stuff. And uh, now we what we see is in Jyotish, you're not expected to do yoga. In Ayurveda, you're not expected to do yoga, but they are so interwoven with each other that anyone doing these kinds of disciplines away from each other, which we are right now because of whatever uh, constraints we have on the very basis on the very understanding of the subject matter itself, is caused us to practice it that way. So yoga inquired into the inner instrument, thus experimenting with restraint, attention, and the direct recognition of purush through lived discipline. Then we have Sankhya, which is inquired into metaphysical architecture, thus enumerating tattvas, gunas, and contemplating the causal scaffolding of all experience. So Sankhya is sort of where we get all the enumerating principles. For example, if you have Pancha Mahabhutas, and then Pancha Mahabhutas, the five elements as they call them, the five bhutas, are also used in Jyotish. Ayurveda is founded on that. Jyotish is founded on that. Sankhya yoga is sort of the method. Sankhya is what's revealed by the method, the realization of the metaphysical structure. Jyotish is the study of the dynamics of that structure in time, how those inrumating principles are impacting us and creating our reality. Then we have Vastu, inquired into spatial order and proportion, the geometry of time, thus reading the intelligence of space, direction, and form as embodiment of Rit, the cosmic pattern, the cosmic order. You see, so they are not separate disciplines. They are to be viewed in one harmony. They have their own rules, they have their own methods, they have their own techniques, principles, but the underlying core philosophy is the same. The idea of gunas, panchamahabhutas, karmendriyas, jnanendriyas are all the same. So, whenever you study any of these sutras on any of these topics, you'll find a lot of the terms being commonly used. You cannot do Vastu without Jyotish, but a lot of Vastu is done without Jyotish. And the Jyotish that is used by Vastu most of the time is also incorrect a lot of the times. The Ayurveda that is used with Jyotish is cannot work because Jyotish is not using the season based zodiac, and Ayurveda is based on the seasons. So then Jyotish and Ayurveda get fragmented. You see a lot of the miscalculations, mathematical errors, the philosophical distortions about the nature purpose of these disciplines have sort of completely, and also the texts being lost to various issues, political issues, socioeconomic issues. We have what we have is tatters of these scriptures just scattered around. We don't know how to make sense of these things, and we are sort of working our way back towards realizing the full potential of these disciplines, which are a unified whole. Now they've become fragmented. Jyotish, Ayurveda, Yoga, Sankhya, Vastu are a unified vision. So these inquiries were not compartmentalized, they were overlapping meditations of a single ontological field. Their divergence came much later through fragmentation. Right? How do we know this? Someone would say, what's the evidence for this? The evidence is that when you study a Jyotish Sutra, you immediately start seeing ideas around the grahas and the Panchamahabhutas. Panchagrahas are given Panchamahabhutas, Jnanendriyas, Karmendriyas, Gunas. Then we see in Ayurveda, it's the same. The Ayurveda is using the same thing. Sankhya is basically laying out the entire structure. Vastu is space, and Vastu utilizes basically Jyotish. And these things cannot be used in isolation, but they are being used in isolation, and they are causing more distortion, misconceptions of all kinds are coming, and because things are being stated from this in this superstitious way, and in this really uh, not an intelligible fashion. It is become the pseudo gold standard of pseudoscience, and there's no dignity anymore left in pursuing these disciplines, uh, especially the thinking, the rational mind, the types, the people who are actually well suited for these kinds of things are not attracted to these kinds of things, and they see these things as just these ancient superstitions, and they need to they're outdated, and they should be completely be replaced by with the modern scientific methods and stuff. A lot of this ancient fragmentation has come to us because of the lack of right kind of dialogue and methods and insight. Now I believe now the time has come for these things to become a complete again. So these systems map the entire field of human experience, not as silos of expertise, but as an interwoven framework of Prakriti, Purusha, Kal, and Dharma. They spoke of a shared metaphysical language, offering perception, healing, liberation, and embodiment through a single coherent cosmology. But over time, through cultural rupture, sectarianism, uh, colonial translation, and the breakdown of oral lineages, this vision began to fracture. So, a lot of lineages became corrupt. A lot of understanding became corrupt. We see this all the time, where uh, the student of teacher becomes corrupt, and the whole lineage becomes corrupt. This happens all the time in all kinds of subtle arts, whether it's some sort of Chinese internal arts, or whether it is any kind of metaphysical meditative art of any kind. So uh, Sankhya was relegated to the abstract philosophy, divorced from applied practice. Sankhya just became this impractical philosophy, or just this thing which philosophers can speak of and contemplate. There was no understanding that Ayurveda, Jyotish, and all of these disciplines are basically applying the revelations of Sankhya. And Sankhya too is to be further cultivated, developed, and made more sophisticated. Though these things are seen as finished works, there's no space to have further dialogue. Just the karikas, the Sankhya karikas, the sutras, the shlokas that we have on Sankhya are to be seen as perfect. There is no scope for further contemplation. Yes, so these are again. This is again quite a quite a thing. Like we need better dialogue around these things. We need to contemplate these things further. Yoga was reduced to physical postures and secularized mindfulness, severed from its metaphysical roots. Ayurveda became clinical medicine, often stripped of its epistemological ground in gunas and doshas as metaphysical realities. And a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners are very apologetic when it comes to speaking of gunas and doshas and all of these things from a subtle angle, the metaphysical angle. And that's what it is about, actually. And even like in Ayurveda, when I was being taught Ayurveda, they used to say Ayurveda recommends eating meat, and though it recommends it as eating meat for in certain kinds of diseases and weaknesses of certain kinds, but people have used those sutras to justify eating meat, because it is being secularized in that way, where it's being divorced from the the goals of Ayurveda, which is always a philosophical presupposition of all of these arts, is always moksha. That's the axiomatic yardstick, the which through which all judgment of good and bad is being made, right? So if something is being seen as is auspicious, inauspicious, shubha, ashubha, fal, something which give you the right kind of fal, is uh, measured through that idea of, will this lead to a better state of consciousness or not? that is being lost as well, because the philosophy is completely distorted and being modernized without being taken care of the roots. uh, Ayurveda has become clinical medicine, often stripped of its epistemological ground. How do we know what we know in Ayurveda? We don't know it comes from Sankhya, Jyotish, and all of these ideas. Jyotish was recast as astrology, predictive, commercialized, and psychologically flattened. Rashis is what is taught as the first thing in Jyotish, which is absolutely blasphemous. The first thing you're supposed to study in Jyotish is grahas, but they start with Rashis and they think you're Leo or you're Libra, but you're not that. You're Navgrahas. You're nine grahas in different. Uh, you're one reverberating psychostructural thing that you are. You speak. You have Mercury. You philosophize. There's Jupiter. You have attention. You have emotion. How can you just be a Rashi? It makes no sense. But that too has been lost. Vastu became superstition or architectural folklore with little reference to its cosmic rationale. And we see in the modern takes on Vastu are so broken. We see um, a lot of it just comes from anecdotal wisdom or really uh, illogical ways of putting things. Where someone would say, oh, like generalized rules, or is always east facing is good, always southwest is like this, or south is always like this direction is always like that. The context of Jyotish is lost. One thing that is good for one person might not be good for another person, and Ayurveda works with this nuance. A fruit that is beneficial for one type of body might not be beneficial for another type of body, right? And so Jyotish uses the context of the individual. Vastu does not. Vastu just has these generalized rule books, and it's wrong. Why things happen the way they are, what dashas a person is in, how the nuances as everything in these disciplines. And they need to speak together in one harmonious whole for the nuance to be grasped. Sankhya, Yoga, Ayurveda, Jyotish, and Vastu need to speak in a unified whole for the nuanced perspective to arise. Otherwise, we will go into technique scavenging, technique curating, like imagining techniques of all kinds without having understood the real philosophy of the subject matter itself. So today, these systems share terminologies such as dosha, kal, gun, purush, but no longer share a unifying vision. They gesture towards similar ends such as self awareness, balance, harmony, liberation of different kinds, whether physical liberation, psychological liberation, or some sort of spiritual liberation, yet operate with disjointed maps and conflicting assumptions. And that's very sad because they cannot have conflicting assumptions. They are not disjointed maps. They're one sort of, they come from the same metaphysics, the same core principles are common to all of these. Uh, so, what's the result of this? As students, we enter Jyotish expecting a standalone technique, unaware that it was never meant to exist in isolation. The Jyotish was always meant to function within a beautiful ensemble, alongside practices that refine the body, stabilize the mind, organize space, and disclose the subtle ontologies of life. Right? So Jyotish is supposed to work with Ayurveda, Yoga, Vastu, and Sankhya. Without this integrative framework, Jyotish risks becoming mechanical, reductive, or poorly psychologized, cut off from the very system that once revealed its true power. So to return Jyotish to its full dignity, we must reweave the torn fabric, not by merging systems, but by restoring the shared foundation from which all of them arose. Right? Only then can Jyotish speak not just of planets and signs, but of the structure of reality itself. Right? And it's such a profound study to take up these studies and they speak to each other. And study of Ayurveda helped me understand Jyotish a lot. Study of Jyotish helped me understand Vastu a lot. Study of Vastu helped me understand Sankhya a lot. You see, so they are all speaking with each other and revealing it more and more. The Sankhya becomes the metaphysics, makes it the psychometaphysics, makes it personalized, psychologizes it, and applies it to your particular lens. Ayurveda gives you the more nuanced perspective of related to your vikriti. At what point do you fall sick? How do you fall sick? How to restore balance? You see, and Vastu harmonizes space. See, so they're all sort of speaking to each other and sort of directing us in these ways. So that's the ancient fragmentation that we have. What's the modern fragmentation? If the ancient fragmentation broke the philosophical ground of Jyotish, the modern fragmentation has shattered the surface. Today, Jyotish is consumed mostly through bite sized videos, out of context PDFs, Telegram shortcuts, pop culture memes, shiny techniques without any telos meaning goals. We are flooded with information, but starved of orientation. The seeker today isn't lacking in access, they're lacking in compass. They learn about retrogrades, wrong ideas about retrogrades. Retrograde is connected to Cheshtabal. And now, if you speak of retrograde and Cheshtabal, no one knows what Cheshtabal is. Why? Because they haven't gone into Shadbal and understanding the psychoastronomy, the metaphysical astronomy, which gives Jyotish a certain meaning, right? So then a certain philosophy is lost, a certain understanding of what retrograde means is lost. Yogas, exaltations, nakshatras, but I have no idea what Jyotish actually is, why it matters, or what it's for, right? So we don't see the chart as a mirror of consciousness, we see it as a diagnostic for external results. This is how we end up with what do we end up with because of all of this? Astrologers who predict fortunes but never touch the self. This is why something is even fortunate or unfortunate, why someone has so much fortune or not, what's the psychology behind it, what kind of person one needs to become to have a certain kind of reality. And if one is not able to become that person, how to accept that? What do we even want? Who are we even? So those kinds of things are lost. Students who memorize rules but never develop perception. Practitioners who speak of karma but never inquire into causality, right? So Satkaryavad, which is an idea in Sankhya, which is causality. And so that's lost. Contemplating causality is lost, but the word karma is used very easily. And a public that confuses therapy with remedy, which is like mundane, superstitious remedies are used instead of therapy. And self knowledge with identity games, which is one of the most complicated part of it all, which really distorts our uh, sets us back a lot. But this confusion is not accidental. When you strip Jyotish from its philosophical roots and ground it in fear mongering, blindness, and magical superstitions, confusion is the only logical consequence. Right? And you'll see all kinds of content on Jyotish, which has nothing to do with Jyotish. It will be palmistry, numerology, and all of these ideas because Jyotish is so distorted that we need all of these other things to make sense of Jyotish. Though these things, for example, there are videos about if you're born on these dates, you have Raja Yoga, which is such a broken idea of what a Raja Yoga is and how it works and what it means to have it and what it does not mean, how to judge. All of these things are so nuanced. You need so much study to understand these ideas, and it has nothing to do with your date of birth and the numerology based on it. It's such a distorted, fragmented place that we have arrived at. It's such so broken. It's mind boggling. Then we have technique without telos. We don't. So another major source of confusion is not just the abundance of technique, but the absence of telos, the guiding aim, the reason, the why. So most students today are introduced to Jyotish through technique, which is how to read a chart, how to use dashas, how to identify yogas, how to predict marriage or money. So this isn't wrong, but it's backwards because technique without an understanding of its aim quickly becomes mechanical, obsessive, and hollow. You don't know why you are predicting a good marriage. For example, someone says, "Will I have a good marriage?" What does that mean? uh, what kind of psyche this is, whether they'll have a good marriage or bad marriage, depends on the psychostructure that they are. It's the study of the unconscious. There's a depth psychoanalytic process that needs to take place for this person to become self-reflective, for jyoti to arise in themselves, that it becomes so obvious to that individual that given the way I am, given the way my unconscious patterns are, this is the consequence that I'll naturally have. So one is not shocked when they have a good or a bad marriage if they have fully understood who they are, how they're orienting themselves. So coming to consciousness is what Jyotish does, and that makes life more predictable or less predictable depending on different factors. This isn't wrong, but it's backwards because technique without an understanding of its aim, as I said, quickly becomes mechanical, obsessive, and hollow. The question is not how does this technique work? The question is why would I use this technique at all? What is this technique trying to reveal about perception, karma, and the nature of experience of this particular individual? Right. So a lot of it is we don't even know where we are aiming. So it's so confused, and we see gemstones being recommended for affecting how can Jad have an impact on Chetan instead of if someone has a issue related to their mercury, right? So there's some, let's say they have speech issues, so they would need speech therapy, but they would instead be given a gemstone for mercury. So mercury is a psychostructuring factor creating a certain. The remedy is not the gemstone. The remedy is getting speech therapy, a therapist that would allow them to train that aspect of their consciousness. So we see these things as things that need to be rectified outside of ourselves through some magical means, but they're actually very part and parcel of the psychophysical being that we are. So mercury issue could also give an issue with twak meaning skin, the covering on the body. So if someone has skin issues, they're probably having mercury issues. So now they don't need a gemstone again for mercury, they need a skin doctor, which would help them have a better understanding of what how to manage their skin. So again, these things have been distorted to the point that we are, as students of Jyotish, when we enter this world with all these spiritual, magical, superstitious claims, we really get uh, carried away by these things and being manipulated a lot. I was manipulated a lot for the first 3 or 4 years of my studies. So without Telos, Jyotish becomes a predictive obsession, a remedy delivery system, and superstitious wrong kind of remedies, a spiritual bypass, which is such a thing, it's such a toxic thing that happens in Jyotish and a lot of the spiritual arts, or worse, a domain of control, identity, and egoity. So we begin to study in order to predict, not to perceive. We start reading charts to feel powerful, not to become more conscious. All the whole thing is understood upside down. So we are really confused and come with a lot of like triggers of all kinds and don't know where to look, how to look at things. We are taught the wrong way. We taught the wrong things. A lot of this is like it's being taught Rashis the first. Like starting your studies of Jyotish with Rashis is a very broken way to teach Jyotish, but that's how it has been done. You collect techniques the way some people collect crystals for a sense of security without real integration. But Jyotish is not a system of tricks, it is a system of illumination. Its techniques are meant to support insight, not replace it with gemstones. So the real question becomes, what is the aim of this technique in my study of the self? How does this principle help me understand the dynamics of karma and time? How does this structure refine my perception of reality? Until the telos is clarified, technique becomes a maze. You may feel like you're going deeper, but you're just going in circles. And that's why Jyotish hasn't really progressed in any way. We have just been going in circles, and we are just reaffirming each other's lies. So before asking how, always ask why. Before applying, always inquire. Because Jyotish doesn't just function technically, it reveals only in proportion to your intention. The Jyoti of the Jyotishi reveals the Jyoti of Jyotish. So the Jyoti of the Jyotishi, the consciousness, the level of awareness and understanding of the Jyotishi will reveal how much Jyoti their Jyotish will have. As much as the Jyoti of Jyotish will reveal the Jyoti of the Jyotishi. It's a mouthful. I really liked writing that particular confusing statement. But reread it and think about it. How the ongoing culture undermines study. So now we have the ancient fragmentation and we have the modern fragmentation. And then we have the confusion, the lack of the right kind of goals and aims, the right kind of questions are not being asked. So we need to figure out the right questions to ask so that Jyotish can progress further. Now the modern culture is undermining deeper study, the rush to learn and become a Jyotish and open one's shop as quickly as possible to be able to start making money and start scamming people. It's just absolutely so sad. Even with a sincere heart and the best of intentions, it's nearly impossible to study Jyotish in the modern world without interference. This is not just because the world is hostile to Jyotish. The world is hostile to anything that acts like Jyotish. If it's presented the right way and taught the right way and understood the right way, the world is very welcoming to such ideas. The world would want to believe and use these ideas. It's just it's not that the world has anything against Jyotish. It's just that Jyotish itself has something against itself at the moment. Jyotishis are broken, but also because it's structured to undermine deep learning. So we live in a culture that celebrates speed over depth for good reason, but depth requires deliberation and patience. Novelty over return. So new ideas, new techniques. People want to make a breakthrough in Jyotish. They want to do some advanced research. So every Jyotishi has their own research, own new ideas. They haven't worked with the first principles, the known things, the known ideas and sutras. They're trying to come up with new stuff to have a breakthrough in Jyotish without having first contemplated the basics properly. Performance over contemplation. So it's all about uh, predicting the future and then boasting about your prediction online and making 20 predictions and 18 of them go wrong, two go right, and you make a big deal out of it. It's also really broken. It's we're not supposed to predict the future that much. We're supposed to predict patterns and and possibilities, and that makes the predictability comes from the patternized, how unconscious one is. The more conscious one becomes of their structures, and the more possibilities that open up in the future. So but these things have to be fully understood, contemplated before we sort of unhook ourselves from this idea that we've become obsessed with as students of Jyotish about predicting the future, and that's what decides the quality of an astrologer and stuff like that. Consumption over relationship. So y- cultivating a long-term relationship with Jyotish requires patience, requires the right kind of study, the right kind of demeanor, over just this thing that everyone is an astrologer. Everyone feels they have the right to be an astrologer. No one does that with engineering, doctor, pilots. You need a certain kind of uh, you need to be have a certain kind of orientation to be able to study Jyotish. You need to be objective, analytic. You need to have a lot of dedication. It's a very painstaking work and takes a lot of time to study it and understand it. But it's been shown as like this thing where you can just quickly consume it and get done with it. And a lot of people within 6 months to 1 year want to become astrologers. Certificates, they come to India, take a certification for 3 months, 6 months, and start reading charts, which is okay. But it takes a minimum of 5 to 10 years, I believe. At least 5 years is the minimum time that you require to have like a basic grasp of things, for all the things to come up, where you have to study your grahas, rashis, bhavas, shadbal, avasthas, yogas, dashas, and all of these things. So these habits seep into everything, even sacred study. So we find ourselves rushing through content instead of sitting with questions, collecting graha traits like zodiac memes, mistaking reels for revelation, thinking we've understood because we can repeat the terms. But Jyotish is not built to survive this approach. It's a system that requires slowness, that asks you to return, revise, re-see. It requires you to live life. It requires you to have to have gone through a lot of transits and make certain observations and stuff that demand your participation, not just your attention. Right, your attention needs to be fully present with the process of learning. The ongoing culture hasn't been supporting Jyotish in the way Jyotish is to be studied. This is why so many students feel burnt out, overwhelmed, or paralyzed. They're trying to digest the darshana inside an algorithm. They are trying to lead rhythm through platforms designed to fragment time. Add to that the spiritual branding, the influencer astrologers, the market driven teachings, and soon the study of Jyotish becomes an aesthetic, a performance, a projection. Right? So it it really is. It'll take everything from you to study Jyotish if you really want to become a Jyotishi properly. So studying Jyotish requires patience as the number one thing, and sincerity, but it would also require something more than that that we'll discuss. So we forget that real study is intimate, it is quiet, it is often even unshareable. It unfolds slowly in private through contradiction, correction, and return. Jyotish will not open itself to a distracted seeker. This is not because it is elitist, which is another Marxist reading, but because it is subtle. It has nothing to do with power and all of these things. It is just a subtle thing. It requires slowness, and it requires silence, and it requires a good cultivation of a relationship with one particular teacher. Going through several YouTube videos and technique scavenging and trying to make sense of the system has made the system so broken. Everyone thinks that they have an idea about something. Oh, I'm number eight, right? Oh, I'm such a Rahu. It doesn't work like that. We need to stop, we need to slow down and study these things from the very basics, from the very beginning. It can only be seen by eyes that have stopped scanning for something new. So part of reclaiming this path is not just finding the right teacher, but finding the right relationship to time, attention, and learning. Right, so you cannot be attention deficit and be able to study this. That's why basic dharan shakti has to be there, and learning has to be there. Wanting to learn, openness, coming with a lot of your own ideas will also break things. Patience, the need for a guiding frame. So once we've seen how fragmented, decontextualized, and culturally distorted the study of Jyotish has become, the question naturally arises: so what now? What's the alternative? The answer is not more content. The answer is not even better teachers, though it is. We need better teachers. The answer is a frame, a coherent orientation that restores meaning to structure. Because structure without meaning is noise, and information without context becomes weight. Right? So we need to contextualize all the information that we get, and we want to structure it properly so that it's meaningfully assimilated and just then become like a lot of noise. So, guiding frame gives us a sense of where we are in our study, a sense of what comes first and why. super important. As I said, grahas have to be learnt first before, then rashis, then bhavas, right? So you're sort of descending on earth. Grahas, then your rashis, the space around earth, and then bhavas, which is bhu, the anchored from with lagna touching off on the eastern horizon of the sky and earth, heaven and earth sort of meet. That's the lagna, and things come become subjective, grounded in your personal experience. So a sense of what comes first and why, a reminder of what Jyotish is actually for, and most importantly, a means of discerning what to ignore, right? So without this, even good teachings will feel disjointed. Even brilliant sutras will feel abstract. Even sincere effort will begin to feel heavy or aimless. But with a frame, even limited study becomes luminous. Even simple graha principles become mirrors. Even repetition becomes revelation. Right? So the right frame is important. Having a proper framed structure and following that structure without getting distracted and going into YouTube rabbit holes to information gather and scavenge as much techniques or understanding of Jyotish. Just that's the biggest thing that happened to me in my studies, and that was I tuned out everyone and just started focusing on one particular framework. So without this, even good teachings will feel disjointed, right? Other, so if we need that. So what does such a frame look like? It includes a clear definition of Jyotish, a philosophy, and the relevant literature. So that is the first step. A metaphysical understanding of time, karma, perception. Again, a deeper study of all the relevant literature has to be done. What is prarabdha? What are we studying in Jyotish? What is time? How we perceive? What is consciousness? Atman, this is sun. A study sequence rooted in ontology, not convenience. Teacher often start with signs, rashis, which is totally wrong. No, a proper ontology, a proper structural thing has to be placed. A posture of study grounded in Shraddha, Tapas, and revision, revisiting a lot, restudy. Shraddha, which is being dedicated to your studies, having faith in your studies, and Tapas, which is going to get hard. It's going to get hard, and you have to study. And when you study, you have to go through the process. It's not an intuitive process. Intuition will come in its own time. It's a very hard on sort of analytic information based knowledge based process with like a lot of dialogue between the teacher and the student. You don't need a perfect curriculum, but you do need a thread, sutraic study, something that ties each technique, idea, or insight back to a living center. Without a frame, you'll forever feel like you're almost getting it. With a frame, even one verse becomes a lifetime worth of revelation. And it's so true. Even just one sutra properly understood, let's say that sutra that we keep speaking of, Sarva Atmacha Devanatho Mano Kumud Bandhavaha. So that just understanding that sun is Sarva Atman, Manas is moon, it will tell you so much more about how Jyotish is trying to work itself out than to have gone through all of these random videos and random ideas around these principles. Seeing through the noise and returning to meaning. So the confusion isn't your fault, but clearing it is our responsibility. Is not our fault, but it is our responsibility to clear off this confusion. So Jyotish today is buried under centuries of fragmentation and a flood of content. The noise is real on every level, be it philosophical, there's a lot of noise, a lot of confusion, pedagogical, learning based, teaching based, a lot of noise, cultural, digital. The light hasn't gone anywhere, it's just been scattered, and to see again, we must gather. So that gathering does not begin with more study, it begins with discernment and a willingness to ask, what kind of knowledge am I absorbing? From what orientation is it coming? Who is teaching it? Does it deepen my perception or just decorate my vocabulary? Once that question is alive, you begin to see the difference between transmission and performance, between darshana and technique, between real guidance and spiritual branding, between the voice of a graha and the noise of a meme. Slowly, you must stop chasing astrology and stop being overwhelmed in your studies. You start listening to Jyotish one and one thing at a time study, slow and deliberate study. You return to the fundamentals, but because they're basic, but not because they're basic, but because they're infinite in depth, right? So you can, as you'd study, you go fast also, and then you revise, and then you go ahead, you learn something, and then you come back and you revise, and then you go through this process of layering and learning. It'll become such a rich experience. There's so many new insights would come to you in your learning process. Contemplation is The whole point is to contemplate things and to live life also, so that you can see how in your experience and directly observe the phenomenon that you're studying in Jyotish. The importance of method, teacher, and rhythm. So this is the most important bit. In an age saturated with content, one of the most radical decisions a student can make is to stop consuming and start studying with one teacher, one method, and a coherent frame. Once discernment has been applied and trust has been established, it is no longer efficient to gather perspectives. It is time to commit to a process. This means letting go of endless buffet of YouTube videos, popular books, and algorithmically driven suggestions. Go through that process and then make your mind. And then instead of entering a space of structured, sequential, and silent learning, guided by someone who has lived the work, doing so clears the noise. It builds rhythm, not restlessness. It fosters assimilation and not indigestion. Otherwise, a lot of indigestion happened. It happened to me, and I had to go through years of unlearning all the things that I had learned, and sort of it was so much. It was such a bad waste of 3 or 4 years initially, but it gave me so much perspective of what's the logic being used for any kind of thing in Jyotish, which leads to a kind of interpretation and understanding and things like that. So it can save years of wandering, confusion, and superficiality. You progress faster. Jyotish, like any other true discipline, cannot be mastered through exposure. It must be entered with humility, fidelity, and method. Method is important, a teacher is important, and a right rhythm and a right pace is important. And then you can become an amazing counselor. Your studies will give you a lot of joy. You'll enjoy the process of learning and understanding, and all the moments of just clicking. It's like makes so much sense, and your own understanding of yourself will give you so much relief. So it's really important that we find these kinds of guiding framework, a structure, a teacher, a rhythm, and understand that what we have is the ancient system is unified system that has been fragmented. The modern system is not allowing for deeper study, but there are ways to see through the noise, and one of the ways is to remove all the content, too much content, and just focus on focused, layered, slow, deliberate study. So thank you so much. I've been very sick over the last 7, 8 days now, and that's why I haven't been able to post. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. I am really low on energy right now. I'm gonna right when I shut this video, I'm gonna start coughing again. It's like I have a lot of phlegm here. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye bye. Take care.